Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on Strep A infection caused by Group A Streptococcus, hosted by R-Biopharm Australia and New Zealand, presented by Murray Robertson, Pathlab, New Zealand. I'd just like to honour the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this region in which R-Biopharm Australia is based. For more than 65,000 years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have created knowledge as Australia's first scientists, technologists, engineers and mathematicians. This deep STEM expertise is embedded in active management of country, farming, food production and medicine, fire use in the landscape, engineering systems in dams and fish traps, water resources management, technology and tools, and aerodynamics, astronomy and navigation. For those of you who are not aware, R-Biopharm acquired Oz Diagnostics. R-Biopharm Australia are manufacturers in vitro diagnostics reagents and robotic systems for molecular-based syndromic testing. Specialising in highly multiplex PCR, our patented MT-PCR methods enable more informed diagnostic decisions in human health, animal diagnostics and applied testing. With one of the most comprehensive testing panel suites in the industry, our products address testing needs within the areas of respiratory, enteric, STI, antimicrobial resistance, dermatophytes, amongst many more. Today, the R-Biopharm Group supply to laboratories and hospitals around the world from our headquarters in Germany and offices in New Zealand, United States and United Kingdom, with a mission to improve patient outcomes through diagnostics innovation. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Following the presentation, there will be a Q&A. There will also be a chat option to leave your question throughout the presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Murray Robertson for joining us as a presenter today, sharing his knowledge and expertise. Murray is deeply passionate about the field of microbiology and has dedicated 29 years of service in Pathlab in New Zealand, contributing significantly to the organisation and the field of medical science. His commitment and accomplishments led to his appointment as a service lead for microbiology and molecular pathology, a role he continues to hold today. His leadership is centred on the continuous improvement of the services provided to patients, ensuring that the laboratory remains at the forefront of scientific and technological advancements and fostering a culture of innovation among his staff. Joining us is a subject expert matter, Jalal from R-Biopharm, a Master of Science in the field of medical biotechnology, an experienced product manager specialising in the development of commercialisation and lifecycle management of molecular diagnostic solutions across infectious disease, antimicrobial resistance, and animal health portfolios. With more than 5 years of hands-on experience spanning R&D, regulatory compliance, quality systems, and commercial strategy, Jalal has successfully guided multiple diagnostic products from concept through to validation, launch, and post-market optimizations. I'd like to take this opportunity to hand over to Murray to deep dive into his insightful presentation.
Thank you, Olivia. I'll start by just sharing my screen. Okay, so a culture change for throat swabs. I'm Murray Robinson. I'd like to welcome you this afternoon. I'm the service lead for microbiology and molecular pathology at Pathlab. First, disclosures, R-Biopharm or Oz Diagnostics, as when we did this work, met the validation costs for this assay. So just a brief overview. I'm going to give you just a little bit of an overview of Pathlab. Then we're going to talk about throat swabs and a little bit about what we were doing and why we changed and where we went to, the collaboration we had with R-Biopharm, and then the outcome of this assay going live. So Pathlab is a New Zealand pathologist-owned private medical laboratory. Microbiology and molecular are centralised to Tauranga, and we have 3 regional hospital stat microbiology laboratories, as well as another big laboratory in Hamilton. Microbiology is a 24/7 service, and molecular runs 7 days, but not all tests are done across 24 hours. Between micro and molecular, we do more than 500,000 specimens a year, and we've been doing molecular testing since 1999. So just looking at a map of New Zealand, Tauranga sitting here on the east coast, just a bit south of Auckland. The blue area on the North Island is our normal catchment area, which is about 15% of New Zealand, population of about 800,000 spread over 40,000 kilometres. The yellow area, as well as the blue, is the area we get HPV work from only. So the work with the throat swabs is from this blue area in New Zealand. So where can we improve? I think it's a question we should all be asking all of the time. There's always new processes, new tests, new methods for old tests. There's things we can do to improve logistics. We should always be looking at lean processes, reduce turnaround time, and also what new equipment may be out there. And for us, throat swabs were on our molecular hit list, so to speak. We do approximately 60,000 per year, and we felt that it was something we needed to look at what were the other options for us. So let's start off with why do we do them, and move through these questions. So the first thing, why do we do them? Pharyngitis and the potential sequelae, so acute rheumatic fever, which then leads to rheumatic heart disease, and also glomerulonephritis. Obviously, if you're looking for yeast, it's thrush, and you can also have a throat swab looking for gono as well from an STI perspective. So just looking briefly at these two conditions, the acute rheumatic fever is, of course, the immunological response to that Group A strep, and it can affect lots of organ systems, but the one that's probably most traumatic is the heart, so your rheumatic heart disease, and the long-term cardiac damage that can have, often leading to surgery if not treated properly and managed properly, obviously death. And if we look at it on a global scale, you can see that rheumatic heart disease, particularly in the African continent, is very, very prevalent, but also across South America and Asia. And looking at this particular map, you would think that New Zealand and Australia are in a pretty good position. However, when you break it down a little bit further, and here we're looking at acute rheumatic fever, not rheumatic heart disease, but that immunological response that's been measured. And you can see that for Maori and Pacifica people in New Zealand, the prevalence is much higher than for non-Maori and non-Pacific. Also, the distribution over New Zealand is far from uniform. It's very much where there are higher concentrations of Maori and Pacific people. And within our region here, there is a high prevalence of acute rheumatic fever. And Australia is very similar. Within the First Nation people, a huge level of acute rheumatic fever. And again, very much concentrated in the Northern Territories. And when you compare it to all Australians, they are disproportionately way, way high. So how do we process them? Our standard microbiological culture was on 5% sheep blood Columbia agar with 3% salt as a slight selective agent. Obviously, if we were looking for gono, we put up an NYC plate and a Sabnex plate if we were looking for yeasts. These plates were processed on BD Keystra with images at 16 and 28 hours, and we identified the organisms using Bruker MALDI-TOF. And I know this is not an exhaustive list of the isolates that you can get from a throat swab, but the key things that we would be looking for, obviously in the majority of them, that Group A strep or a CG strep, yeast in the case of thrush, and the gono in the case of an STI type situation. And so this is actually the period we were looking at when we were evaluating things as far as this 1 year. Across our 80,000 population, we've done 69,000 throat swabs, which is about 9% of our population have been swabbed. And 16% of those samples were positive by culture. One of the questions that is often asked, do you need antibiotic susceptibilities to be performed on these isolates? And if you do, in what clinical situations? So when it comes to A, C and G streps, the treatment options are very predictable still. The susceptibility is very predictable for these organisms, and it's really only in the case of penicillin allergy that you need to routinely look at doing susceptibilities. Obviously, with a gono isolate, you're always going to look at doing susceptibilities. So we wanted to look at how often did we do susceptibilities on our Group A strep isolates. And over that 1 year period, we had over 11,000 Group A strep isolates, and we actually only did susceptibilities on 32 of them. So that's 0.287%. So very few indeed. And looking at our culture turnaround time, again, looking at that 12-month period, our average turnaround time was 48 hours for 91% of our throat swabs. So to us, this suggested that throat swabs were a prime candidate for molecular testing. Molecular testing did have the potential to increase our sensitivity and decrease our turnaround time, but the clinical details and the requests and the information that we got were vital to be able to identify those patients that had penicillin allergies, or if the requester was looking for something other than a Group A strep, so in a thrush or an STI type situation. So where to from here? We looked at what was available in the market, and there were few options. The actual swab transport media depended on the test, and the options that were out there were pretty much all point of care. And we were not looking for a point of care test. We wanted something designed for volume, and there was nothing out there. Because they were point of care, they tended to be very expensive, and we really couldn't integrate them into our current workflow with the volumes that we were getting. And so we were talking to R-Biopharm, or Oz Diagnostics as it was then, and I have to say they did all the heavy lifting with the developing of this test. So we discussed what we were looking for and what they were considering. The big thing is we wanted Group A strep as a target. CG is potentially another option. It needed to be performed on a liquid Amy's e-swab because we wanted to be able to do reflex culture on positives that required susceptibilities. Obviously, high volume throughput. And one of the great things about this assay that R-Biopharm brought to the table was that they were looking at an extraction-free method, which obviously reduces the time and also reduces the cost, which was great from our perspective. So Pathlab provided the clinical specimens and the conventional culture results for comparative work, and also helped with the review of discrepant results and reculture where it was possible. This is just a very brief look at the 4 targets. So there's 4 targets that were developed for this assay. Obviously the Group A strep target, the Group CG strep target, an internal control to detect inhibition, and a human DNA adequacy sample, which is really good because from a culture point of view, if you don't grow any normal flora, is that because it's an inadequate sample, or is there another reason why you didn't actually grow anything? So having the human DNA adequacy sample there was a really good thing. So we decided that, yes, we wanted to do some scoping work together and find out how this assay performed. And so this was our initial scope testing, and we didn't go into great detail. We just wanted to really have a proof of concept here. And we were very happy with these results. We expected there to be quite a few PCR positives that were culture negative. And we also thought that we may have 1 or 2 that were culture positive, PCR negative because of the extraction-free side of things. But we had a sensitivity of 97% and a specificity of 94%. So really favourable results. And we decided it was worth progressing to a full validation and for R-Biopharm to get the XL instrument adapted to be able to do the volume that we needed. So full validation. It was as per the scoping test, so the same assay, the Ritter Genex Group A strep and SDSE Group CG. and we were going to compare it to our culture in Multitoff with our liquid amines, and we were using Copan eSwab on the same media that we'd used. And what we also introduced was discrepant analysis, where we didn't have agreement. We would look at reculturing, retesting using the R-Biopharm assay, and also use the GeneXpert Express Strep A point of care test to help resolve any discrepance. So we looked at 836 throat swabs. And this is our primary measure. So 19 specimens were excluded, and I'll come back to them shortly. So we had 817 results. And looking at them, we had 30 that were culture negative, PCR positive, and 7 that were culture positive, PCR negative. Interestingly, of those 19 that were excluded, 14 of them were inadequate as far as the human DNA side of things was concerned. So looking at the secondary measure after discrepant analysis, when we went and retested those 14, 9 of them actually gave us an adequate result, and we were able to utilize those results. 7 of the so-called false negatives were positive on rerun, and there was 1 that was negative on rerun, but it was positive by culture. Whoops, go back, sorry. Positive by culture, and it was also positive by the secondary PCR. So that one was definitely a false negative. And then of the 30 false positives, 14 on reculture, we actually grew the Group A. 15 were positive by the secondary PCR, so again deemed to be true positives. 1 we had to exclude because we didn't have sufficient sample to do the secondary PCR test on. So that gave us for Group A strep a sensitivity of 99.49%, specificity of 100%, positive predictive value of 100%, and a negative predictive value of 99.84%. And our our Group A strep positive rate was 24%, which compared to culture of 16%. So a real improvement as far as the sensitivity was concerned. So go live. We decided before we went live, we needed to do a in-house verification with our staff doing it, but we weren't going to go as in-depth in the discrepant analysis, and we weren't going to do a second PCR test. So as you can see, the sensitivity and specificity were again very good. The positive predictive value was down a little bit, but that was because we didn't do the discrepant analysis on the so-called false positives, and we believe that they were true positives. Interestingly, of those 11, 9 had a CT value of greater than 30, and we know from all of the work that we've done that we wouldn't culture them at that sort of CT value anyway. So we were very comfortable with the results, and that 1 that was initially negative by PCR and positive by culture on retesting was positive. So on Monday, the 7th of April this year, we went live. Our clinical microbiologists made the decision to only report the Group A strep. There isn't this clinical sequelae associated with CG, and they felt it was driving unnecessary antibiotic use. So they only wanted us to report the Group A strep. The workflow was going to change for us. So most of our throat swabs come in the afternoon, evening. And so our micro staff were going to review the request form on the afternoon, evening, and any that were for thrush or STI type screening, they would do a culture on. And the rest of them would get put in the chiller until the next day. And they'd be run that following day. And we ran the test 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday. We were able to run 382 samples in less than 6 hours using the XL instrument. We did have a few teething problems, as you often do with these things. The first one was reagent supply. We were trying to guesstimate our numbers, and we didn't guesstimate them too well, and we got a bit low on supply, but that was quickly resolved. The other problem we had was the instrument computer kept on crashing randomly, not on every run, just occasionally, and that created a few problems for us. This is our workflow at go live. So obviously the collection of the sample are couriered to the lab, specimen services register it. In microbiology, they do that check, is it for Group A strep only, or does it require the culture? And if it was for Group A strep only, it went into the chiller overnight. The next day was the molecular test, and then storage. The result, positives, we would check and we'd look at the form to see if there was a penicillin allergy situation, retrieve the sample and do culture if that was necessary. Otherwise, we just put out the positive. If it was negative, it just went out. And if it was invalid, we would look at repeating the test. If it was repeatedly invalid, then we would put out an invalid report. So from go live to the 31st of July this year, we'd run 23,328 throat swabs on the assay. Invalid or failed, so in other words, a human DNA of greater than or equal to 32 was 24 specimens, so only 0.1%, which is great. Well collected samples. Inconclusive, so this is where the Group A strep target had a CT value of greater than or equal to 34. We only had 9 specimens, so 0.04% that went out as inconclusive. The repeats, we initially had quite a few, and that was very much related to the computer crash issues. And in June, we replaced that computer, or R-Biopharm, should I say, replaced that computer for us. By July, we were down to no repeats. Repeat numbers are still very low. And as far as inhibited samples, so this is where the internal control is a CT of greater than or equal to 25.5. We had 8 samples, but 6 of those were positive for Group A strep. 1 was positive for a Group CG. So there was actually only 1 sample that we reported as inhibited out of that 23,000 samples. Of those, 5,562 were Group A strep positive, so a positive rate of 23.8, which really fitted in with our validation verification work and far superior to what we were getting from culture. As I say, we didn't report the CGs, but they had a positive rate of 2.8% across that 23,000 samples. This is just a breakdown of the people we were looking at. So as far as age group, as you would expect, most of them were the young people, 5 to 19 years old. And then the shoulders of that were the next 2 biggest groups. This is the split from our different sites, which is related to the populations within those areas that they are covering. And as you can see, the positive rate was between about 21 and just over 25%, depending on the site, but all pretty consistent across the 5 sites that send into us. And then this is the turnaround times for those 23,000 samples. As you can see, in May, we weren't reaching our turnaround time. That was very much related to the issues we were having with computer crashes and some reagent delays. And it was in the 2nd week of June we had the new computer, and so you can see that things improved. And July was our first month where everything was as it should be, and we were getting 95% of our samples through in 39.1 hours. And bear in mind, that time could be made quite a bit shorter if you actually ran the samples the evening the samples arrived. We have chosen to put them into the chiller overnight, so that effectively adds probably 10 to 12 hours onto that turnaround time. So there is the potential to get this comfortably below 30 hours if you ran the samples when they came in. So in summary, detection and treatment of Group A strep is critical to minimise acute rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease. That Group A strep molecular testing is a viable alternative to culture. That the R-Biopharm assay test performs extremely well, and we have seen increased sensitivity and reduced turnaround time with our use in our laboratory. I'd like to thank R-Biopharm for all of their support through this. They have been absolutely awesome. To the Pathlab CEO and directors who have supported us through actually making this all happen. To the molecular micro teams who, without them, none of this work would be possible, and we really appreciate all of the work you've put in to get things to where they are now. And thank you to you guys for listening.
Thanks, Murray. That was fantastic, really insightful. I've heard that a couple of times, but I think it gets more of an impact every time I hear it. So, and it's really great to see the results in the last sort of recent months as well. We're going to open up to the Q&A now. We've got Jalal also on standby, so you've got Murray and Jalal who can answer those questions. Can you take them, Jalal?
Yeah, so we have a few questions that have come up, but please feel free to post anything as well in the Q&A tab if you think of anything. One of the first questions that came up was, is there an option for manual processing of respiratory swabs and also running of PCR? Yeah, so the empty perfect cell is designed for more high throughput and being able to run up to 384 samples in 6 hours, as Murray has kind of said. But the swab kit that is used for the processing of respiratory swabs can be used manually with just a hot plate, and then the PCR as well can be run manually if you wish to do so. The high plex that you guys, some of the attendees may have already in their lab, can be used to run the PCR. So it's an easy, put all of your agents on the deck, put in your samples and run it. The other question that came through, and I think probably Murray, you probably have to answer this question. What is the delay for turnaround time for the antibiotic susceptibility requests since moving to PCR? Because I'm assuming this is because you don't have the culture sample anymore. And has that caused any issues?
It certainly hasn't been an issue. Yes, there is a slight delay in that the sample will come in one evening. We'll get the result the next day. And if it is Group A positive and susceptibilities are required, the sample will go up that afternoon. As far as culture goes, the following day, assuming that we have grown the isolate, and that's very much load dependent, and we certainly find that the CT value will give us a really good idea whether we're likely to grow it or not. One thing I will comment there is that we have not seen deterioration in storage in the chiller. So all the swabs are kept at 4 degrees and they have not deteriorated in that storage period. And so then on the following day, we would be putting up susceptibilities and obviously you then require the minimum 16 to 20 hours as far as incubation time for those susceptibilities. So compared to, say, a culture setting side of things, there could be a 1 day delay in getting susceptibilities compared to a culture side of things. But as I say, that's 0.287% of our specimens. So we have not had any issues from that point of view. We've not had any complaints from that point of view. We have had circumstances where once we've reported the result, the clinician has come back and indicated the person has an allergy or they require susceptibility testing, and we've just pulled the swab out and performed that at that time, and never been an issue to date.
So moving on to the next question, was what cyclers has this been validated on? So there's 3 cyclers that this has been validated on. For more, if the option, if there's no high plex that you have is available in the lab, the Biorad CFX can be used for a completely manual processing of samples. That has been validated on the MT analyzer and also the new reader cycler. Yeah. And the other question has been asked is about why is Group C and G not being reported for strep? I think you kind of touched on this, and yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so that was something we had a lot of discussion about, and C and G do not have the sequelae of a Group A strep. And in most cases, there's real debate if you look at the literature as to whether giving antibiotics really actually shortens the course of the illness. And the big thing is, obviously, we don't want people to get acute rheumatic fever or rheumatic heart disease and the associated issues. You're not going to get that from a CG. And we felt that from an antibiotic stewardship point of view, if we reported the CG, we'd be driving the use of antibiotics when it was clinically debatable whether it was going to help the patient, but would drive resistance across the board.
And the next question is, what is the price per test? And I think that's probably a question that a lot of you may have. Where this is a unique solution where the thing that was being compared to, or that we comparing ourselves to, was the culture method. So the price is quite competitive, but I'll probably kind of let you speak to your sales representative about the exact price. Yeah. So just viewing. Yeah, so I can probably answer this question. Can I go through the probe design that was chosen for gas and SDSC kit and which channels were used? This is a very simple throw of channels that we used. It was just SPAM, HEX, ROX, and CY5 for the 4 targets in the panel. Yeah, so there's the so this was regarding the internal control, whether it needs to be positive as well, even if the Group A strep results has a low or strong CT value. And I guess probably leave it with you, Murray, and how you're dealing with those. I guess the values for that is negative.
Yeah, so as far as how we're actually dealing with them, if it's a low CT value, so a really strong Group A, or for that matter, a strong CG, and the internal control is negative, that doesn't matter. We will still obviously report that result. It's just that competitive aspect of the assay. That means that you may not get a positive internal control.
There's another question. Is there a risk of over-reporting Group A when there is such a high sensitivity with the PCR test?
Yeah, good question, and I was expecting this one to come up. No, I don't think there is. Certainly, if I look at our local population, acute rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease are a huge problem within our population, and we are looking to try and get rid of that organism as far as being part of the flora within that community of patients, and particularly within the Maori and Pacifica populations. And often you're looking at a whole family, and some of them may not have a clinical pharyngitis at the time, but they may well be carrying the organism. And if you don't treat those and get rid of them, then chances are that you will once again spread it throughout the family, and once again actually have cases of pharyngitis leading to those bad sequelae. So no, I don't think it's it's too sensitive. I think it's actually very effective for trying to stamp out this organism within families where it's a problem.
Well, we might leave it there. We've got no more questions. Again, I'd really like to thank Murray for joining us. I'd like to thank everyone, Jalal also, and everyone joining online. We really appreciate it. We will follow up with you, and if you'd like to reach out to your local sales representative in relation to those costs and have a better understanding and discussion with them, please do so. We'll make sure we share some links post webinar. Thank you again, and we look forward for you joining us. We have a really great webinar lined up for Q1 next year, and we'll make sure we reach out to let you know.